welcome to a new video on my channel. Today, I'm excited to present part 4 of the story, Pandora and the Eternal War. This story is still a reworking of my older ones, so I hope you'll enjoy this updated and revised version. It was written with the help of ChatGPT, and some parts were even narrated by ChatGPT, though not all of it. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about which voices you liked best. So without further ado, let's dive straight into the story.
Pandora lifted the spoon to her lips once again, taking another mouthful of the beetroot soup. The flavor was rich and familiar, and for a moment, it soothed the sharp edges of her thoughts. But just as quickly, the warmth turned to an aching reminder of her past. The taste brought back memories of home, of her mother's cooking, and the family she had lost. She swallowed hard, trying to suppress the pain. But to her confusion, she felt a tear escape her control, slipping down her cheek and falling silently into the soup. The large woman, standing near Pandora, noticed the tear. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle, genuinely concerned. Pandora quickly shook her head, unwilling to expose more than necessary. "No," she said quietly, "it's just. I haven't had soup like this in a long time." That much was true, but it barely scratched the surface of what she really felt. She didn't want to reveal too much, didn't want to share her burdens with strangers. As she forced herself to refocus on the table, Pandora noticed the boy with the fiery ability edging closer to her. His face was soft, innocent, and filled with a kind of naive concern. He slid closer on the bench, his presence almost comforting, and then, tentatively, he placed a hand on her arm. His touch was light, cautious. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine care. Pandora felt a surge of conflicting emotions. There was something about this child, about all of them in the room. Their innocence gnawed at her resolve, at the wall of hatred she had built for humans. But even as the boy tried to console her, she couldn't shake her distrust. They, even as children, were still capable of becoming the very thing she despised. Her thoughts spiraled into bitter clarity. Even when they're small, she thought, they still have the potential to cause harm. They can grow into heroes who will get in my way, who will take from others as they've taken from me. Their misguided morals, the ones forced on them by the hero association, will make them just as blind as their parents. Her grip tightened slightly on the spoon. If they don't shed the belief that vampires are evil, they'll never truly understand. This world is rotten to its core, and they're part of that decay. Her eyes flicked across the room, landing on the other children. She had already noticed something peculiar. 3 of them had powers. The young boy with the electrical sparks crackling faintly around him, sitting slightly apart from the others, clearly ostracized because of his uncontrollable static. The girl with a greenish hue to her energy, something life-giving, something healing. And then, the boy sitting beside her, his fire dormant but unmistakably there. Pandora could see their powers, glowing subtly within them, not a visible aura but a kind of energy she could sense, almost like a second heartbeat hidden deep within. Her gaze lingered on the electric boy. His ability was weak now, but it could grow stronger. Pandora's mind sharpened, piecing together the situation. He wasn't completely unaware of his power. He knew it existed but likely hadn't realized its full potential. The faint static, the way his touch could sting others, this was only the beginning. The thought of what he could become unnerved her, but it also intrigued her. Then there was the boy next to her, the one trying to comfort her with his hand still resting on her arm. His fire burned quietly inside him, but Pandora could feel it. This was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. She focused on his touch, reaching out with her senses to his ability, feeling the warmth within him like a sleeping ember. Sooner or later, she thought coldly, I'll have to take it. She weighed her options, fleeing if things went wrong, or in the worst case, eliminating everyone in the room in her vampiric form. But even the thought of killing them felt off. It wasn't the plan her parents had laid out for her, and the idea left a bitter taste in her mouth. No, she would take a different approach. Running would be safer, more discreet. As Pandora concentrated on the boy's hand, she began to tug at the core of his power, gently, cautiously. His muscles tensed slightly, reacting to the sensation, but he didn't seem to realize what was happening. Perhaps it was too subtle for him to notice. He shifted, looking like he was about to pull his hand away, but Pandora gripped him tighter, refusing to let go. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice steady as she forced a smile. The boy nodded, seeming reassured, but his body twitched again as Pandora continued to draw the power from him. Slowly, she felt the warmth of his fiery ability seep into her, swirling like a small, glowing ember inside her own core. It was still weak, dormant, but it was there. A soft, red glow took form in her mind's eye, and she smiled internally. The boy, though slightly confused, didn't seem to notice what had just happened. Pandora had been careful, slow, ensuring the transition was barely perceptible. "If I'm cautious enough, they won't even know it's gone," she thought. But she knew that not every situation would allow for such patience. If things ever escalated, she might not have the luxury of being subtle. Pandora reminded herself to only steal quickly in moments of absolute necessity, when stealth was no longer an option. But for now, she had time. As the boy shifted again, his hand falling back to his side, Pandora withdrew her senses.
Pandora could feel the power of the boy's ability inside her now. The strength of the ability itself felt weak, but the knowledge she had gained was invaluable. She had learned that she could steal powers discreetly, without drawing attention. A faint smile crept across her face as she realized that this newfound knowledge made her a threat that no one would suspect. The idea of collecting powers like a hoarder gathering rare treasures was oddly satisfying to her. Even if she didn't want to harm anyone, there were always ways to collect abilities that no one else desired. "Do you have a mattress or anything comfortable to sleep on?" asked the tall woman, who stood nearly 2 meters, her voice deep and kind as she sat at the table. Pandora answered casually, stating that she didn't mind sleeping on the floor, as she didn't have any belongings with her. They were all with her grandfather, or so she claimed. The woman seemed to accept this story without questioning it and offered to let Pandora borrow a mattress from one of the other children in the orphanage. However, Pandora politely declined, saying that she didn't want to cause any trouble or discomfort for the other children. She let out a small yawn as the evening grew darker and the children began preparing for bed after brushing their teeth. The orphanage caretaker led Pandora through the dimly lit hallways, pointing out where the children slept and eventually showing her a small, tidy broom closet where Pandora could rest for the night. On the floor were some old blankets, folded neatly to provide a modest comfort. It was far from luxurious, but Pandora didn't mind. She had slept in worse places before. The woman also showed her the bathroom, which was just down the hall. Just as Pandora was about to settle in, she noticed something that caught her attention. A larger boy, stocky and round, was pushing around a smaller, blond boy with striking yellow eyes. The larger boy seemed to be asserting some twisted sense of dominance, his voice filled with arrogance. Pandora heard just enough of the conversation to gather what was happening. "I need 2 mattresses to sleep well. You don't need yours anyway," said the larger boy dismissively. "But, I can't sleep well without it. My back already hurts. Please, just give me my mattress back," the blond boy pleaded, his voice soft and shy. Pandora observed the situation carefully. The blond boy seemed genuinely afraid, not just of the bully but also of his own powers. Around him, faint electrical sparks flickered, almost invisible but present enough for Pandora to notice. She realized that this boy's fear came from his lack of control over his abilities, which caused him to hurt others unintentionally. It was clear to Pandora that he was an outsider, likely ostracized because of this. This could be her opportunity. Pandora thought carefully. If she played her cards right, she could offer to remove the boy's powers, framing it in a way that wouldn't reveal her true ability to steal powers. She came up with a plausible explanation. She could claim that she had the power to erase abilities. If I could spread that idea, Pandora mused silently, maybe I could find others who want their abilities erased too. But how would I even go about this? And what would I do with all the useless abilities I collect? I should really test the limits of my own power before I gather any more. The idea of these powers sticking with me forever is unsettling. As Pandora stood just outside the door, lost in thought, the stocky boy suddenly noticed her. "Hey, who's there?" he called out, opening the door to find Pandora standing right in front of him. The boy flinched at the sight of her. He took a step back, clearly intimidated by her presence, though he tried to hide it behind a glare. Pandora stared down at him, calm but firm, her voice steady as she spoke. You shouldn't be picking on others, she said coldly. What are you going to do about it? He's a freak, an irregular, the larger boy spat back. He can't even control his powers. We've all gotten shocked by him before. One of us even had to go to the hospital because of him. The word, irregular, echoed in Pandora's mind. Her father had often spoken about irregulars, people who were labeled as a threat by the Hero Association. Irregulars weren't just those with weak powers, they were anyone whose abilities had passive, uncontrollable effects that could harm others. The term also referred to those whose abilities caused them to look different from everyone else. Pandora glanced at the blond boy. His face was filled with worry and shame. She could see the small sparks of electricity crackling around him, barely noticeable but ever present. His fear of touching anyone, of hurting them by accident, was evident. Even in a place as sad and broken as an orphanage, the fact that children were excluding one of their own simply because he was an irregular made Pandora's blood boil. The rage was enough for her to momentarily drop her carefully crafted mask. Her eyes glinted with malice as she grabbed the small, chubby, 10-year-old boy by the collar, pulling him close. His breath hitched in panic as Pandora's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. What gives you the right to treat someone like dirt just because they're different? Someone who's lost as much as you, someone who doesn't have parents, just like you. She stared into his wide, fearful eyes. Don't you feel even a shred of guilt for how you've made him feel? The boy, once so full of bravado, now shrunk under Pandora's piercing gaze. Her words hit him hard, peeling away the layers of excuses he had built up over the years. He had always used Carl's awkwardness and the strange power he couldn't control as a justification for bullying him. Now, with someone directly calling him out, he couldn't deny it any longer. Still, he tried to keep his shame hidden, refusing to let it show on his face. But Pandora wasn't done yet. Did you hear me, you little fat lump? She growled, her grip tightening just enough to make the boy tremble. Under Pandora's glare, the boy relented, grudgingly returning the mattress he had stolen from Carl, the shy blonde boy who had been silently suffering. As Pandora turned to leave, her steps heavy with frustration, she caught a soft whisper from the boy. It was barely audible, but it still reached her ears. You're a villain, he muttered, his voice a mixture of fear and resentment. That word, villain, made Pandora smile, a crooked grin that twisted her features. The term suited her, she thought, far better than the naive title of hero ever could.
Pandora found it strangely liberating to consider herself a villain. There was an undeniable freedom in not having to conform to society's strict expectations, not having to play the perfect role of a hero. But as she pondered this feeling, she realized how carelessly people labeled anything that didn't fit their norms or threatened their interests as villainous. That word was often just a convenient excuse to lock someone up or punish them more severely than they might deserve. For many, being called a villain meant they had free rein to chase or hurt that person without any guilt. And the heroes? They often hid behind a mask of righteousness. But Pandora knew better. She was fairly certain that corruption ran deep within the Hero Association, deeper than most people would ever suspect. Sure, some heroes were truly noble, but far from all. Perhaps most were genuinely heroic, but Pandora had no way to confirm it. She simply assumed that there must be a smaller portion of fallen heroes, those who were either corrupt or committed their crimes so discreetly that no one noticed. Who could really know for sure? Pandora understood human nature too well to trust such statistics. Heroes were just people, and humans were not, by their nature, pure. Absolute righteousness was simply not in their makeup, and no superpower would ever change that. On the contrary, power often brought out the worst in people. Pandora was convinced that many heroes, especially those who wielded great power, abused it, whether consciously or not. They, like everyone else, were vulnerable to temptation, to greed, to vanity. Some were better at hiding their darker tendencies than others, but Pandora had no doubt that those tendencies were there. Heroes weren't superhuman. And those few among them who hid their corruption well might even be more dangerous than some of the most notorious villains. Back in her room, Pandora sat on the bed, then let herself fall back, feeling the hard floor pressing against her spine. The room was quiet, the soft breathing of the other children in the orphanage echoing through the walls. But sleep eluded her. Her thoughts swirled around the possibilities her powers presented. She had already absorbed the boy's power, and though it was weak, she could feel its potential. But what if she took even more? The irregular, the blonde boy with electric abilities, crossed her mind again. If she stole his power, it might be convincing enough to claim that her ability was to erase others' powers. However, she was aware of the complications that would arise if the Hero Association discovered someone who could erase powers, let alone steal them. Pandora realized in that moment how much more drastic the Hero Association would act if it were to come out that her power wasn't just to erase abilities, but to steal them. The very notion of stealing powers would likely be met with disbelief at first, as it went against the very nature of how abilities were understood in this world. But eventually, it would lead to the association hunting her down. She needed something to help her stay hidden, something to avoid being captured. Pandora inhaled deeply as the scent of orange blossoms, elderflower, and hyacinths drifted in from the orphanage courtyard through the open window. For a moment, this distracted her from her thoughts. The night was beautiful, and her heart raced, making her realize that sleep might not come easily tonight. The cold air whipped through the room, and she wondered briefly how the flowers were still blooming in this season. The girl with the green superpower came to mind, and suspicion took root. Perhaps it was her ability that kept the plants in perpetual bloom. This only reinforced Pandora's awareness of the vast number of abilities out there, and how difficult it was to truly understand them all. Even the Hero Association struggled to grasp the diversity of powers, as there were not just singular abilities, but ones that worked in multiple ways. This made it hard to fully register them, despite the registration law that required all powers to be recorded. And then there were the weaker abilities with very specific effects, often overlooked, but still valuable if used intelligently. Pandora's head swirled with all these thoughts, and finally, she sat up, the cold wind brushing against her figure. She walked to the window, and without fear of being seen, closed it while peering out. The neon-lit streets of the futuristic city of Alpha still shone brightly, even in the dead of night. But the moon, glowing with a fierce brightness, almost seemed to mock the artificial lights below, as if symbolizing that no matter how much humanity achieved with its technology, it would never touch the sky. The moon felt like a metaphor to Pandora in that moment. Suddenly, a thought crossed her mind. What if, one day, she too could be far away from Earth, free of its constraints? Her eyes fixed on the glowing orb in the sky, and she wondered what kind of power would it take to reach something like the moon. How can I fulfill this desire? Pandora thought to herself, a twisted grin tugging at her lips. What if I start by seeking out abilities worth stealing, then create a plan, deciding in which order and in what situations I'll take them? A structured approach would definitely be more effective than randomly offering to take people's powers. But where can I find the right abilities? Her mind drifted to the Meta Cup. Superheroes from all over the world would be participating, and there she might find the perfect powers to take. Pandora lay back down on the bed, lost in thought. She focused inward, trying to explore what else she could do with her ability. She felt the fiery power she had stolen from the boy earlier, probing it like one would an object, and to her surprise, it worked. With just a thought, she managed to pull that fiery power out of herself, and now a small, dimly glowing orb hovered before her. It seemed to be the boy's power, still inactive, still hers. A strange impulse came to her, and she wondered, could she destroy it? After all, she was sure she could always steal more abilities. She curled her fingers around the small, marble-sized sphere and squeezed. It was a bizarre thought, the idea of physically destroying something as intangible as a superpower. But Pandora could feel that it wasn't just her physical strength at play here. It was the chaotic energy coursing through her veins, the same power that allowed her to touch this metaphysical object. She watched the chaotic energy flow through her, guiding her will, and as her fingers tightened around the orb, the reddish glow around it flickered. And then, something unexpected happened. The power partially shattered. The fiery glow vanished, leaving behind a small, gray-white sphere. Instead of radiating a fiery aura, it now emitted a formless energy. something Pandora instinctively recognized as paranormal in nature. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she realized she wasn't just able to steal powers, she could also destroy them. She scratched her head with her free hand, wondering whether what she had just done could really be called destroying. After all, something of the ability still remained. She knew, instinctively, that the power she now held would never function again, not as it once did. Yet the energy lingered. Without other abilities to test this on, she couldn't experiment further. Still, this was a significant step toward becoming what she wanted to be. Her goal, for now, was to grow as powerful as her father, who had possessed 5 different S-rank superpowers. But she knew that was a long way off. An F-rank ability was nowhere near the strength of an S-rank one. She'd need to steal thousands of abilities to make a real difference in this world. Yet, she had to keep growing. Stealing powers was her path to becoming stronger. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Pandora eventually drifted off to sleep. The next morning, she was startled awake by a knock on her door. Groggy and disoriented, she blinked around the room before finally asking who it was. The door opened, and the 2-meter-tall woman who ran the orphanage stepped inside, casting a glance over Pandora's barely dressed form, just a short white t-shirt and underwear. "I don't mean to intrude on your privacy, but it's -5 degrees outside, and you're sleeping without a blanket, just in your underwear. Are you sure you won't catch a cold?" the woman asked. Pandora gently shook her head, not bothering to explain that, even in her human form, she was far more resistant to the cold than an ordinary person. In her vampiric form, she thought she could probably sleep naked in temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius without getting sick. As a vampire, she likely wouldn't feel the chill until it reached -50 degrees Celsius. However, the same did not apply to heat. Pandora knew that her vampire form could only withstand temperatures up to 200 degrees Celsius before it became unbearable. The large woman didn't press further. She simply nodded and got to the point. "Your grandfather has arrived, along with your dog." Pandora's eyes lit up with joy. She rushed to the window when she heard that he was already waiting in the courtyard. Down below, she saw Lola, her oversized dog, lying on the ground as 5 boys played with her at once. Pandora smiled, having grown attached to Lola over time. It seemed like the dog was welcomed and loved everywhere, but Pandora wasn't sure if that was because of Lola's natural charm or her 3 different superpowers. As she got dressed and made her way down to Leon, her grandfather, he greeted her with a wave and a smile. Pandora asked how he had found her, and Leon, who was eating a pretzel on top of the large dog, casually pointed to Lola. "Her nose is better than you'd think." But just as Pandora moved closer, Lola growled at her, startling the children nearby. Leon raised an eyebrow and petted the giant dog's head, muttering, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Pandora wondered why Lola was growling at her. This was completely out of character for the usually peaceful dog. Leon wasn't sure either, but he knew that Lola's instincts had saved him from making mistakes many times before. As Pandora took another step forward, Lola leaped back and growled louder, making it clear she didn't want Pandora near her. The question hung in the air. Why was Lola, who had always been so calm, suddenly so defensive? Leon realized from Lola's body language that she was determined to stop Pandora from touching her. Lola was incredibly fast and far more intelligent than any normal dog, which made Leon trust her instincts even more, despite not fully understanding the reason. Pandora, puzzled by Lola's sudden hostility, began to suspect that it had something to do with her intention to steal Lola's powers. Could it be that Lola had some sort of ability to read thoughts or detect danger? Both options were frightening, even to Pandora. But the moment Pandora dropped the thought of stealing Lola's abilities, the dog began to calm down. This made Pandora wonder if Lola's reaction had been tied to her intent. Now curious, she briefly considered stealing Leon's S-rank power, but this time, Lola didn't growl. Pandora found this development fascinating. As Lola calmed down, the children rejoiced, eager to pet the dog once again. The peculiar behavior she had shown quickly faded from their minds. Pandora settled beside Leon, who raised an eyebrow, observing that Lola was no longer reacting negatively toward her. He glanced at her suspiciously and asked, "Why did you trigger Lola's protective instincts? What were you planning?" Pandora hesitated, pondering her response. She knew she couldn't simply admit that she intended to steal abilities. She shrugged nonchalantly and replied, "It was nothing special." Leon shook his head. "No, that can't be right. I know Lola, and she has helped me avoid mistakes for years. If you had touched her just now, something would have happened. Something she didn't want, and it wouldn't have been good. So tell me, what was it?" "I'm not sure how to explain it," Pandora admitted. "But this isn't the right place for that." "Okay," Leon said. "Then we should probably go somewhere else." He turned to lead Lola and Luca out of the orphanage. After exchanging farewells, they stepped onto the futuristic streets of Metropolis Alpha. The city was bathed in the morning light of the two suns, their rays reflecting off the glass facades of the towering skyscrapers. Shimmering, vibrant plants thrived in the unoccupied spaces, adding to the beauty of the scene. The metropolis appeared to be a harmonious blend of advanced technology and untamed wilderness, with trees lining the streets, creating a unique urban landscape. As Pandora and Leon walked together down the street, a tense silence enveloped them. Their shoes rhythmically drummed against the ground, the light shimmering off the white marble tiles that paved the sidewalk. Pandora struggled to find the right words as Leon finally broke the stillness, asking about what just happened. Leon pressed on, his curiosity unrelenting. "I know you have a lot of questions about my powers," Pandora replied, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "But I can't tell you here. We need to get out." Leon glanced around, slightly confused. "We're already outside the orphanage," he pointed out. Pandora shook her head, gesturing toward the thick steel wall that towered into the sky. "I meant out of the city." Her expression was resolute, and Leon felt an emotional whirlwind stirring within him. On one hand, he knew that Pandora was the daughter of his best friend, Elias, who was now gone. He felt an instinctive need to protect her, yet the mysteries that surrounded her, like her ability to manipulate chaos and her apparent naivety about the world, gnawed at him. He watched as Pandora strode ahead. Her demeanor changed since her father's death, and he found himself following her, with Lola trotting contentedly beside them. Leon wanted to say something, to break through the tension, but the words remained trapped in his throat, unspoken. As they approached the checkpoint at the massive wall, the atmosphere shifted. A group of vigilant guards scrutinized everyone who attempted to enter or exit the city. It wasn't common for many to leave. Typically, it was just merchants headed out for business in other metropolises. The sight of the guards added an air of caution to their journey. Pandora and Leon stepped forward, the guards sizing them up with sharp eyes. After a moment of tense silence, Leon confidently stated, "We're visiting family in Metropolis Gamma." The guards exchanged glances, but, after a brief hesitation, nodded and allowed them to pass. Pandora felt a quiet relief as they crossed the threshold of the city and out beyond the walls of Metropolis Alpha. Once outside the city, they found themselves on a highway, bustling with vehicles that shot past them at high speed. Several roads converged onto this main artery, but neither Pandora nor Leon had any intention of following the highway's path. They walked alongside it for several hundred meters, the rush of vehicles creating a dull roar in the background. Soon, they veered away from the road and headed into the untamed wilderness. As they moved further from the road, the trees and dense vegetation swallowed them up, and the guards at the checkpoint faded from sight. The world around them became quieter, the noise of the city and its endless chaos replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of wild creatures. Pandora's gaze remained fixed ahead, her mind already turning toward what lay ahead. For the first time in a while, she felt a sense of freedom creeping in, but something still lingered beneath the surface. An unspoken tension, a secret she hadn't yet revealed. Leon followed silently, knowing that answers would come in time, but for now, the wild path they had chosen stretched before them. Leon rode atop Lola as they sprinted through the dense, shadowy forest. The wind whipped through Pandora's hair as she darted ahead, her heart pounding with a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. The rhythmic pounding of Lola's paws echoed in the tranquility of the woods, the underbrush rustling as they maneuvered around trees and bushes. "Okay, we're far enough from the city now," Pandora called back, her voice steady yet filled with determination. "I need to tell you something important. I'm not entirely human." Leon raised an eyebrow, curiosity ignited, urging her to continue. I am Elias's daughter, she explained, glancing back to gauge his reaction. But you never met my mother. His interest sharpened. What do you mean? My mother's name is Seraphina, Pandora revealed, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Yes, she is that infamous vampire princess. She paused, allowing the enormity of her revelation to settle. I only discovered this recently when I was researching online using the projector you gave me. I always thought she was just an ordinary vampire. Leon's surprise was palpable. Pandora, you know that vampires and humans can never have a child together. You must be adopted or something. That's impossible. A smile flickered across Pandora's lips as she concentrated on her desire to transform into a vampire. In an instant, violet energy enveloped her, flickering like a flame, and with a barely audible pop, her form shifted. Her short black hair transformed into shimmering silver, while her violet eyes glowed with an intensity that had never been there before. Her fangs elongated, and her nails sharpened into claws. Leon stared in shock, struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. You're telling me you're neither fully human nor fully vampire? He asked, bewildered. Exactly, Pandora replied, her voice steady despite the enormity of the revelation. I'm both at the same time. Not half and half, but fully both, in a strange way. He frowned, perplexed. But if you were completely human, how could you run as fast as a horse? Pandora took a moment, then said, That's the thing. I can apparently manipulate my physical form through chaos energy. While running in human form, I somehow managed to change part of my legs to that of a vampire's. And since my skin tone remains the same, you didn't notice. Okay, Leon said slowly, but that's still completely impossible. How can that be? Well, she continued, the love of my parents, combined with paranormal power and magic, apparently created chaos, which is how I was born from it. That seems to be why I can manipulate chaos energy. But I still don't understand all of it. I just know that chaos is part of me. I'm neither human nor vampire. I'm both at the same time. Strange as that sounds. As they sprinted through the forest, Pandora's breath came easily, her energy seemingly limitless. Leon found the story impossible and surreal, yet the nature of chaos itself was mysterious, strange, and incomprehensible. In a twisted way, it began to make sense to him, fitting the chaotic essence of her existence. For a while, they ran in silence, the forest enveloping them in its cool embrace. As twilight descended, they reached a clearing where the trees thinned out, revealing a tranquil glade. The sky turned shades of deep blue and purple, signaling the approach of night. With the sun slipping away, they decided to set up their camp for the evening, ready to rest under the stars that would soon blanket the night sky. And that wraps up today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to share my channel with your friends. This was part 4 of the story, Pandora, the Eternal War. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until next time, goodbye.